Hey, welcome everybody to Pro Mindset Podcast. This is your host, Craig Domann. I've got a guest today by way of Baltimore, Maryland. You know, I hope you guys can hang in there. He's a little confused. He lives in Baltimore. He should be a Ravens fan, but his name is Tori, and he's a Philadelphia Eagles fan. So for all you Eagles, the Eagle Nation out there, you've got fans in places that you shouldn't have fans at. Ed, welcome to Pro Mindset today.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Okay, Ed, you got this very interesting mission you're on, helping people that are in a position of authority, position of influence, position of, like, whether it be a coach-player relationship, whether it be a parent-child relationship, whether it be a C-suite business person or entrepreneur with their people relationship. You coach the people that are in those positions of influence and positions of authority to make life better for the others. So why don't you share your story that you would like our Pro Mindset audience to hear about you today?
Sure. So I started off, so I'm a physician by training, internal medicine. And early on in my training, I kind of felt like I was burning out. So I started to start some online businesses, side hustles, if you will. And when I started those online businesses, I realized that I needed to learn how to scale or to market them. But I also didn't want to go back to school. I'm a father of 6 kids. You know, I was in my training at the time for medicine, and I knew I couldn't go back to school to learn marketing to try to scale my businesses. So what I did was I called up a semi-famous marketer and just said, hey, I'm not a weirdo, but can I come learn from you? I want to understand how you see the world. I'll study what you tell me to study. I'll learn what you tell me to learn. And I just want to understand your craft. And so I did that. I flew out. I took part of my vacation, flew out to California, learned from him a bit, came back, studied what he told me to study. The following year, I realized I needed to learn how to influence people with writing, right? So in the written word, persuasive writing. So I called up a direct response copywriter, a famous direct response copywriter. By the way, those are the people that write things that get you to take an action. So for example, you know, if you're in line at the grocery store and you see a magazine, it says 7 ways to 6-pack abs without leaving your desk. You won't believe number 3. You know, that's a direct response copywriter. So I called, same methodology, called him up, said, hey, I'm not a weirdo. Can I just come learn from you? I'll see how you see the world. And so I did that for the past 23 years, actually, because what happened is early on, although I thought I was burning out of medicine, what happened is I noticed that all of my relationships started to improve across the board with the other physicians, with nurses, with case managers, social workers, with patients, their families, with my own family, my own kids, and my in-laws, my neighbors. Across the board, my relationships improved. And I thought, what is this? This isn't marketing. I mean, sometimes you market to your wife, right? But it wasn't marketing. It was something else. And I realized that's when it was, it's influence, it's rapport, it's connection, it's the flow state between people. So for 23 years, I went and each year I picked a different discipline. So for example, when I wanted to understand attention, I asked myself, who is the master of attention? And then I sought out magicians. And so I call up a magician. Hey, can I come learn from you? When I wanted to understand who is the master of the subconscious mind, I studied from hypnotists and hypnotherapists and even got certified in them. I studied from game designers and gamification. I studied from human factors engineers or cognitive psychologists. And so throughout these past 23 years, that was my path. And along the way, I started, at first became known as the patient whisperer, where they would call me and be like, hey, Dr. Tori, I know this isn't your patient, but can you come calm him down? He's freaking out. Or can you come talk to this family? They don't understand. And then eventually they started asking me, well, like, hey, wait a minute, can you help with this other communication challenge we're having? And so whether it's difficult conversations or toxic cultures or the negative self-talk that people have. And so I guess sort of like the primo sort of story that I have is that I have 6 kids and my oldest 3 thought broccoli was a dessert. And so the way I did that was simply just by changing the experience around broccoli. You know, which would you rather have? A Happy Meal with a toy in it? We all get to go out? Or you better eat your chicken, mister, or you're not getting any dessert, right? So what we did was we changed the experience of broccoli. We served it last. We made it fun, you know, pretended they were trees, there's birds in there. Then from then on, we served the vegetables last, always did something a little different, sometimes made them scarce and said they weren't allowed to eat it, you know, that sort of stuff. But essentially, just how do you, and it came to be this, my mission in life is essentially to help people who are doing good work in the world to be better at influence, to help them influence for good, whether that's influence for a good cause or it's influence for good, like so it sticks and stays. So that's my mission. that's what I do. I train on that. I speak on it. I have courses and workshops and things like that. So that's my mission.
Okay, so everybody, that's very interesting, by the way. I've never had anybody on Pro Mindset that's learned 23 different industries or disciplines in over 23 years. So that's pretty amazing that you had that initiative. Let's take a relationship. So what I heard you say, okay, was that you are a relationship and communication coach, because we're all relating and we're all mentoring and coaching each other. The number one common denominator between everybody that's listening and everybody that's walking the planet is we're from a family. So how do you as a father, besides just playing the games with the broccoli, because that's clever, but once the kids figured out when they went to school that they were the only ones in the class that thought that broccoli tasted good, they started pinging in their mind, okay, what else did mom and dad trick us about? So then they went on this hunt. Like, they didn't believe you about certain things. I got to believe this happened, because that's what my kids would have done, because I did some of the same things to them. So in the family unit, what are the 2 or 3 things that parents don't do that if they did, they could really reach their kids, regardless of whether they're 5 or 15 or 25?
Yeah. I would say hands down, bar none, underline it, highlight it. There's nothing more important than this. In fact, it is in every single discipline I've studied. And that is to manage your state. To manage your state. So in other words, your state, it's not just your emotions. It could be how attentive you are. It could be your energy. It could be that you have something in the back of your head that's, a little bit of pressure on you, or it could be you have to use the bathroom, or you didn't get great sleep last night. If you manage your state, the thing about your state is that your word choice, your body language, the stories you have available to you are different based on your state. So every single aspect of your interactions with other people is state dependent. Your memory, your word choice, your body language, the words you use, the way you use them, your pattern of speech, your cadence of speech. If you manage your state, you change how you show up, you change how you are received. And so this can manifest in so many different ways. I can think of one time we were about to have some guests over. And before you have guests over, you're cleaning up the place, you're doing everything around the house. And right before, about 15, 20 minutes before everybody started showing up, I walked into the living room and it was a hot mess. I mean, there were sheets tied up to the lamps, and there were, cushions were off the couch. There were toys everywhere. And my first reaction was like a boiling inside. Like, I was like, how could they do this? We just spent the whole time cleaning up. And I realized in that moment, I had to manage my state, because what would have happened if it went as normal as, the way it would have gone, is I would have blown up, gotten angry. Kids would be crying, their dirt streaked tears going down their face as the guests come in. And I'd be like, they'd say, oh, welcome, come on in. Oh, hi, it's great that you're here. Meanwhile, the kids are going, crying, whatever. That's what would have happened. But in the moment, if you just take a moment and manage your state, do what you have to do to get into a better state. So in this case, I thought, well, in about 15 years, this room is going to be exactly as I left it every time I walk in and out of it, because my house will be empty. My kids will be gone. I should be grateful that I have happy, healthy kids that are playing together. Not everybody has that. And I have that. And so I got into a space of gratitude, and then I turned it into a game. I grabbed a laundry basket, I put it in the corner, and I was like, okay, guys, line up. And then I went, we have to clean up really fast. Shoot baskets, 10, 9. And we just started picking up the toys and throwing them into the basket. Then we had they were all in a different state. We were in a different state. We were able to receive our guests in a different way. So managing your state is really important. I have another story from the world of patient care. I was once going to a patient's room, and the nurses at the nurses station said, watch out, Dr. Tori, his wife's a doctor. She's been at the nurses station all night. She's been complaining. She's called the hospital president. He's on his way up here right now. Patient advocacy is waiting for you at the door. And I'm like freaking out, like, oh my God, this is a doctor. She's going to ask me all these questions. She's going to grill me, whatever. And I realized, if I walk in this state, essentially, they've handed me a spear, a shield, and a helmet and sent me to battle. And I would have walked in the way I greeted her, the way I introduced myself, the way I ask questions, the way I even look and who I direct questions to, all of that would have screamed, I'm here for a battle. And that's exactly what I would have gotten. And then I would have walked out and had the same conversation everyone else had. Like, yeah, can you believe her? So how did I manage my state in that moment? Well, the moment I grabbed the doorknob, I realized, wait a minute, she's his wife. So she cares about him. She's looking out for him. And wait, she's a doctor. She gets it. Like, stuff falls through the cracks sometimes. And she understands that the science, the safety sciences and quality metrics and all these things. She understands, she gets it. Like, we're on the same team. And so for me in that moment, I actually realized that the doorknob is a powerful, powerful tool, because every time you grab it, there's someone on the other side. It might be your spouse. It might be your kids. It might be a boardroom. It might be a team. It might be somebody on the other side. But in any case, who is walking in when you walk in? What kind of energy is coming in when you come in? Because it's all over your person. Some people sometimes think, well, the stories you have available to you and your memory isn't state dependent, is it? It absolutely is. I mean, if you've ever been in an argument, you can think of all the violations, all the times they did this, all the times they did that. And then if you're sitting down to write an anniversary card or write a heartfelt note, you have very different stories available to you about the same exact person because of your state. So what I say to people in terms of like the best influence advice on earth is to not worry about the actual influence you're having, but instead to start with your state, because everything else flows from that. Now, generally, when I teach influence, I talk about 4 main buckets: states, frames, patterns, and timing. But state, your own state, most important one. Some people pray, some people meditate, some people go for a jog, some people, watch comedy. But whatever it is for you to get into the right state. If you're a football player and you're in the locker room, you're not reading romance novels by Louis L'Amour. She caressed his... No, you're getting ready to smash someone's face in. So you get your game face on in a way that's appropriate for the game. And so the same thing goes. What's your game face for that board meeting? What's your game face for that presentation on that big stage? What's your game face for being interviewed on a podcast? What do you do to get to a state that's optimum? That's the highest yield stuff. And as for my kids figuring out, that's why I said my oldest kids thought broccoli was a dessert, because eventually they told the other ones. But one of my older ones said to me, hey, I saw one of your YouTube videos, and she did air quotes. And I said, first of all, YouTube's a thing. I don't know why you're doing air quotes. She said, I saw one of your YouTube videos. I just want you to know we legit love broccoli. And I said, exactly. So anyway, there you go. Yeah.
That was very well said. And I agree with the 100% of what you said related to managing your state, because it shows up. Like, let's just take the sports arena. Let's take the New York Jets, have struggled a little bit, and NFC East team, they fire their coach. And it's like, how he handled certain situations with his quarterback, with his team, his body language on the sidelines the last couple games, all led me to believe when I watched his last game as an NFL head coach that he wasn't going to be there very long. And I represent one of the coaches on his staff. And so it's like I have some inside scoop, but it's like the bottom line is, if he, and he can't do this, but if he could go back and redo those games, and I would love to redo a few things I've done, not the best, but it's like he did not manage his state. He didn't manage his confidence. He didn't nurture relationships that he needed to have. He got pushed away by Aaron Rodgers. I don't know when it was, when they were in Europe or wherever they were. But the bottom line is, the other aspect that popped in my head when you were talking, Ed, is this. If you're asking me, what's a situation I've run into millions of times, and I've had a spectrum of responses and states. And what was the best state I had, and what kind of response did I get? And what was my worst state that I had, and what kind of response did I get from that? Because you don't have to have a very high IQ to realize you were the common denominator in both those situations, and your state was the number one influence.
Yeah. 100%. And that goes across the board, where you think your state doesn't matter. For example, if you open an email and you think, why the heck did she just CC everyone and their mother-in-law? And why is she saying it that way and this and that? You know what? Your state is affecting how you're reading the email. It's affecting how you're writing the next email. It's affecting how you send the text. It's affecting all of that stuff. So get really good at understanding and assessing what is my state right now. And so what I do is, it's not like I'm walking around with some sort of state meter, constantly assessing myself. But if I detect a change, I get curious and I look inward. Hey, why am I feeling this way right now? And is this going to serve? Because if it isn't going to serve, then what can I do to change it? What do I need to do? Do I need to go for a walk? Do I need to step away? Do I need to engage? What do I need to do? So I think it's an important aspect to get really good at detecting the change when it occurs in yourself, and then being deliberate about what your state is for whatever it is you're facing.
Being intentional. Let's go back to the simple concept of a lot of guys are hot-headed, okay? And they, probably say things they wish they wouldn't have said. Whether it's a coach, it's a little bit off the handle. It could be a dad that does the same thing. I've done that in my life at certain times. How do you regulate your state so that you can have good intentions in how you show up? Is there like a framework that you have for people to learn how to regulate? I mean, what I just heard you say was, when you feel a change, get curious and then decide which way it's going to go. But is there a bigger, like, let's just pretend like you're talking to an audience or you're coaching people. How do you teach people to regulate their state?
Yeah. So first, one of the things that's really important when it comes to influence and each of the individuals is that they are in fact individuals, and people are different. And so some of the time you do have to explore and figure out what works for you. For example, I've tried, some people say, you should journal in the morning. Okay, yeah, I tried journaling, but guess what? It didn't work for me. I tried it. I would write. I was inconsistent. And then I tried, maybe I should do shorter versions, or maybe I should do these things. So for example, like I do this gratitude practice every morning. I write down 5 things that I'm grateful for. But that started off as an attempt at full on journaling. And it didn't stick for me. It didn't work. But just pausing, it's literally less than 2 minutes, but I think of 5 things I'm grateful for. And it might be as broad as nature, or the wind, or birds chirping, or it might be that I have healthy kids, or what have you. So whatever the things are that I'm grateful for, I just list them. So that works for me. And that gets me into a sort of a gratitude state to start with, but that might not work for someone else. And so it's important that we sort of examine what does work for us. As far as somebody that might be hot-headed and and have times where there's an outburst, like any one of us does at certain times. One of the things to do is to, if you can anticipate those, if you know the settings that this occurs, or the times the words sometimes that trigger us, if you can anticipate them, you can start to be more deliberate in that time before.
Brother, we got the anticipation. We know that this is an environment, and the people that are going to be in this environment are going to want to talk about things that are going to trigger either you or them. How do you matriculate and navigate through those situations?
Yeah. Say that again. I'm sorry. I don't fully understand your question.
Okay. So you were saying be aware of triggers, anticipate triggers. Well, it's the mother-in-law. It's a somebody it's going to be a trigger.
Yeah.
You already know.
Yeah.
So you have awareness beforehand, and then the trigger is triggered. How do you respond?
Yeah. Okay. So that's great. So if it's a high energy emotion, like anger or anxiety, there are tools that can first reset your physiology. Now, sometimes if you step away and you step outside and you just take deep breaths outside and the air and whatever, that can be enough to reset your physiology. But let's say it's at a dinner table. It's Thanksgiving. You're sitting around and you're triggered by somebody just said something. There are lots of tools in the tool belt of coaches and peer supporters and therapists. One of my favorite ones, so throughout COVID, I was like what I call care for the caregiver coach for physicians and nurses going through the stresses of COVID. The one technique that I've seen come back time and time and time again is a technique called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I don't know if you've ever heard of that.
I have.
But essentially, you haven't? No. Okay. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 is essentially in that moment, the moment it floods, the moment the high energy emotion, undesired emotion floods, then if first you look for 5 things you can see. You pick 5 random things you can see. So you look around and you see, oh, I see Craig's Pro Mindset book. Okay, it's got somebody running on the front. I see, the jersey with the thing on it. I see a shelf, right? You pick 5 things you can see. Then 4 things you can feel. I feel, the wind of the ceiling fan. I feel my shoes, my feet in my shoes. I feel whatever you're feeling, right? Then you pick 3 things you can hear. I hear the hum of a ceiling fan. I hear my voice. I hear whatever. And you pick those things. And then you usually don't get to taste or smell, which is the next 2 are smell and taste. But 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, what happens here is the general principle that backs this up is where attention goes, energy flows. Okay? Where attention goes, energy flows. So if you divert your attention, here's the thing, we can only handle 5 to 9 things at a time. At any one time, we can't handle more than 9. Some say 7 things at a time where we focus on. So if you saturate your attention by 5 things you can see, 4 things you can feel, 3 things you can hear, if you saturate your attention, your physiology comes down just enough. It affects your state just enough to be able to have a healthier response. So that technique has been incredibly successful, and I'm really surprised at how often that is said to work. So that's one thing. It's essentially
something real quick. I'm listening to you. It totally makes sense to me. And if I'm in a Thanksgiving dinner and there's 12 people there, and it's not a one-on-one conversation, I can take the time to go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and do exactly what you said. But I'm running on the field. The coach is screaming at me, and he's going psycho on me. And I'm trying to think about what my job is, what the play call is. And this man is being crazy. How do you regulate then? Because I saw it with the Denver Broncos and their head coach last week, their starting quarterback. He's a young rookie doing a great job. And he responded. His body language was like he was rebuking the head coach's authority. He was basically saying, hey, here's a boundary. You can talk to me a certain way, but you've crossed the line. So in those kind of battles that happen sometimes even in the professional world, they happen in hospitals. They happen in surgical centers. They happen everywhere. But they definitely happen in sports. You're on the wrong end of that. How do you regulate your mental state when somebody is threatening you?
Yeah. So, one, that technique and others like it can still be used in that instance. But keep this in mind. In every one of the instances you brought up, whether it's sports or it's healthcare or it's all these different, the Thanksgiving dinner table, all of these scenarios are scenarios that you encounter again and again and again and again. And just like you practice your craft, this has to be part of your practice. You have to be deliberate, because here's the thing about our ability to communicate, our ability to regulate emotionally, is that sometimes not sometimes, all the time, we need to practice, because these are habits. These are we have habits of thought. Somebody says this word, I get triggered. We have habits of emotion. Somebody, acts this way, I feel this emotion. Those habits can be deliberately shaved away over time. So I mentioned in that story where the nurses warned me about the person in the room. I, from that point on, trained myself to use the doorknob. Whenever I grab a doorknob, it's a trigger. It's a trigger for me to get into the optimum state, no matter what that is. So if you are running out onto the sports field, if you're running out onto the field, how many hundreds of times have you run out onto the field? Well, what can you choose on the field that is a trigger for you to get into the right state? It might be the enemy helmet. It might be the sound of the crowd. It might be that first few steps as you run from the sideline. But whatever it is, try to create an anchor that is there every time, and then deliberately shape it over time. So the first time I grabbed a doorknob after that event, I didn't think of it. But after I went back and I was thinking, oh man, I should have managed my state before I walked in there. And then the next time I thought about it right after I walked through the door. And then the next time I thought about it as I grabbed the door. And then the next time I thought about it before I grabbed the door. And then eventually over time, it becomes a habit. So essentially take that thing and slowly march it back in time so that it's anticipatory instead of reactionary. And if you can get that to happen, you're already practicing the play. This is part of it. So practice that too.
And you're anticipating the coach is going to be pissed off because of whatever is going on in the flow of the game, the momentum of the game. And so he's done it every time. So you know it's coming.
Right. You know it's coming.
Shocked he's going to be pissed off.
Yeah.
So your doorknob could be the sideline, the
right.
chalk line on the sideline.
Yeah. Not only that, if the coach is doing that to someone else and they have an amazing reaction, like the optimum reaction, afterwards pull them aside and be like, bro, I saw you. Like, how did you do that? How did you go from him talking to you like you were a flea and go out there and perform like that? What's going on in your heart or your head, or like, what do you do? How do you handle that? And guess what? Sometimes people will give you a nugget that and it works for you and you try it. That's what I mean by get curious. Get curious and start asking other people. When you see people do it well, find out, probe, what do you do? Now, I'll say another thing. Sometimes, and this is especially good for coaches themselves, to sort of frame it or get the players and anyone in any sort of setting to get them to realize that the physiology of anxiety and the physiology of excitement are the same. They're just different frames on them. So, heart rate up, breathing fast, on edge, amped up. Are you anxious? Or are you excited? Are you anticipating doing, crushing it? Or are you nervous that you're going to drop the ball? Like, these are two states that are very similar. But the mindset, if you have a pro mindset, you will be able to flip it to the anticipatory side. And this takes work. It's not something you just, you read a book, you listen to this podcast episode, or you watch somebody on a speech. No, you have to deliberately practice this stuff. Deliberately be aware of your state, and deliberately practice changing it.
I'm always trying to bolster the pro mindset model. And one thing that where I connected some dots with what your messaging is inside the performance bubble, you need to make sure that you regulate, I'll call it regulate because that's where my brain's at, regulate your state. Because if you can regulate you can believe in yourself, you can have confidence in your skills, you can block out all the distractions and the expectations and the fears and the doubts, and regulate your state for the curveball, for the surprise.
Yeah.
You can stay in that bubble. Otherwise, the bubble implodes. It's cracks. And all of a sudden, all this stuff comes in. I see baseball players all the time. I don't know if it's anticipating regulating their state, or if it's a superstition. But when pitchers run out to the mound, they don't want to step on the line, the foul line. And so it's like everybody has something like that doorknob you spoke about. Baseball players have the foul line. Football players sometimes, I feel like they sometimes have their, almost like their sweat towel. It's like they just, if they lose that, that's their kryptonite. I mean, it's like they got to have that towel. And it just symbolizes, hey, I'm ready for battle. I'm ready to play. They lose that towel, their body language change. They're like searching for it. Where in the heck's that? Where's my towel? I mean, it's like 4-inch by 12-inch little cloth, but it has so much more meaning to them than what we would think it would have.
Yeah. Or look at anybody at a foul line, right? They have their ritual. They're about to shoot the free throw, and they have their ritual. And if they're a little bit off, it's
times,
off.
Whatever it is, right?
Yeah. So another thing that's really good for rapid sort of skill development in terms of managing states is changing frames. Frames are really powerful. Actually, recently I was speaking, I asked the group to all close their eyes, and I walked them through, imagine that there's a little girl, she's running and she's looking over her shoulder and she's giggling as she runs forward and giggling really hard, a cute giggle. She's 2 or 3 years old, giggling really hard, running forward, looking back over her shoulder. And take note of how you feel, and then I said, keep your eyes closed. And now imagine that little girl has 2 adults chasing after her. Their arms are outstretched. They have a look of worry on their face, and they're coming after her because she's running right for a busy street and there are cars whizzing by 30, 40 miles an hour. And so she's still same little girl giggling, looking back over her shoulder, running forward, but now she's running for a busy street. Take note of how you feel. And then I said, keep your eyes closed and imagine now it's a Hollywood set. There's cameras, there's lights, there's the producer, director, those are actors and actresses. And that's a scene from a movie. Same little girl. Now, what's interesting is in each one of those, essentially, I gave the data, the information, the facts, but with each frame, completely changed the state. The first one, you think it's cute. The second one, you're like, this is awful. Why is he talking about a little girl running for a street? And then the third one, you feel relief. And now what's really interesting about it is that if I tried to walk you through that exercise again, you can't unsee the third frame. It's so sticky, you will not lose the fact that it's a Hollywood set. So if you can change someone's frame, you can change their entire experience around it, right? How many times have you thought, why is he being such a jerk? And then you find out, oh, he's going through a divorce, just lost his mom, and, whatever. Like, you find all these things out, and all of a sudden, that moment doesn't seem as jerky in a way, right? You give him some grace. And so frames are incredibly powerful. One quick story of a patient. He walked into my office and he was wearing a Hawaiian shirt. He was tan. And I was like, hey, where'd you go? And keep in mind, this is like the small talk part. This is the beginning of the encounter. It's not even officially started yet. And I just saw that he was tan. And I said, hey, where'd you go? And he was wearing a Hawaiian shirt, whatever. And he goes, oh, I went on a cruise. And I said, a cruise? He said, yeah, my wife took me. I was like, your wife took you? Wow. And he said, he's like, yeah, she takes me every year. And I was like, every year? He says, yeah, every year we go on a cruise for our anniversary. And I was like, wow, what'd you do for her? He goes, found some purse or something she liked and I bought her that. And I was like, oh, well, I know the perfect gift. He said, you do? I said, yeah. I see the way she scrunches up her eyebrows, purses her lips, looks down at the floor and shakes her head back and forth every time I talk to you about smoking. I mean, I bet. No, I don't bet, I know. I think you know too, that if you quit smoking, that would be the best gift you could possibly give your wife. Now, what happened? I didn't give him the medical information. I didn't vomit a bunch of information on him about, all the data that says, you get a stroke if you smoke and you do this. No, I talked to him. I reframed it as a gift for his wife. And how you frame the thing can sometimes be so sticky. I mean, think about it. Every year he goes on a cruise. Every year he has to think of a gift. Every year he comes back tan, and every year people ask him where he went. Every year he thinks about it. So can you create a frame, especially if you're a coach or a parent or a leader? Can you create a frame that is so sticky that it can't be unseen? If you do that, you can affect the state of an entire organization.
No, that's outstanding. Create a frame that's so memorable and sticky, they can't forget it. Okay.
Yeah, you can't unsee it.
So you can't unsee it. All right. No, you're in my wheelhouse right now, because this stuff is the stuff I like talking about, because it applies to everybody. It doesn't matter what you do, where you're from, what your situation is, what your career is, whether you're at the top of the totem pole or at the bottom. These concepts are applicable, valuable. They can really change the trajectory of your life, because when you show up different, you get different. People treat you differently. And the thing that as you were going through the frames, I'm thinking, how often do we try to have the perspective of the person on the other side? How often do we try to have the perspective of the person, be in the shoes of the person that is cutting you off, or that's, like shows up at the hospital and they're just like telling everybody what to do and they're angry, and you don't know who else was in the wreck that may not be alive anymore that's causing this person to be psycho. And it has nothing to do with the people on that floor. It has everything to do with what just happened, 30 minutes ago.
Right. Right.
So appreciating other people's perspective is some aspect of reframing.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, I mean, actually, there are ancient religious traditions that used to require their scholars to make excuses for people before they said something was not permissible. So I like to use the example of, imagine, let's say, okay, I'm an upstanding citizen, father of 5 girls, 1 boy, and, active in the community, all these things.
You have 5 girls?
I do. I have 5 girls. Yeah.
Wow,
They
you're a
all,
girl dad.
yeah.
That's awesome.
But imagine if you saw me walk into a strip club. Now, what are your first thoughts? See, this is where we also need to practice, because our first thoughts are always negative. And so instead, make excuses for the person. Maybe he's going to use the phone. Maybe he has to use the bathroom. Maybe he knows somebody that, is trying to earn some money and thinks they're going down the wrong path. Maybe somebody's struggling with their sobriety and he wants to get them out of there. Maybe he's bringing a letter from churches, mosques, and synagogues in the area that say, we don't want this business in our neighborhood. Maybe he, come up with excuses for the other people instead of defaulting to they're doing this because of this and that, right? So, and it's the same pattern of beliefs that we have sometimes when we have negative self-talk, but we also have negative talk about others. Men are pigs. The traffic here is awful. I can't do public speaking. People are more afraid of public speaking than they are of death. That woman, she shouldn't be a leader. He's too old. He doesn't understand technology. Like these sort of, I can't lose weight. It's genetic. Like if you believe that you can't lose weight because it's genetic and genetics equals destiny, you will take exactly 0 action on trying to lose weight. If you think, men are pigs, what kind of relationships are you going to have? If you think, I'll never beat that person at this particular sport because they're the top of the whatever, that's a belief that you will carry it out. You will act it out. That's the same way we have those about ourselves, and we can also have them about other people. We need to deconstruct any belief that limits our ability to move forward, because they're not productive. They're not productive. And now sometimes people are that way. Maybe that person is a jerk and they have other stuff going on, but then you're not responsible for their behavior. You're responsible for your responses. And so be deliberate about those. That's all. Work on it.
That's fantastic. Doc, let's move to the third level, which was patterns, I believe. So share with us, how does patterns show up in this space?
Okay. So patterns, I would say, are, well, you've heard the saying, doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is the definition of insanity, right? Well, doing the same thing over and over again is a pattern. So if that's what's happening, you need to break it. And so there's things called pattern interrupts, where you take the pattern that's occurring and you break it. And what happens is, at that moment, you snap to attention. At that moment, it's the moment of learning. At that moment, it's the moment of the epiphany. So imagine you're driving down the highway. You're driving down the highway, you're going somewhere. You get off the exit, you drive to wherever you're going, and then finally you arrive. And you don't remember the details of the drive. But if you were driving, zoning out, listening to something, doing whatever, thinking about other things, and all of a sudden something ran out in front of you, what do? You snap to attention. The same thing goes when sometimes, if you think about it, this person is always this way, they're always this way, they're always this way, they're always this way. And then you learn something about them. You're like, oh, I didn't realize that. That's a pattern interrupt. All humor is an interruption of a pattern. You're going down a certain path, and then the punchline is a break in the pattern. This is the highest yield time for learning. If you can create a pattern and then break it. I'll tell you what, imagine if there's that, you were talking about coaches, imagine the coach is always screaming, it always in people's faces. He's always right up in their faces. He's always this a certain way. If he walks in and is dead silent, that's a pattern interrupt. That's a pattern interrupt. So if you can interrupt a pattern, the people around you will snap to attention. And so that can show up in lots of ways. It can show up in parenting. It can show up in, in all these things. So if you become a master of the patterns, and if you think about it, all of our behaviors, our patterns, our emotional responses are patterns. So if you can sometimes break those patterns, that's the highest yield moment. So, in learning, they've done studies on learning, right? Like, so, there's this one study that I think is quoted in the book, Influence, the Psychology of Persuasion by Dr. Robert Cialdini. I think that's where it is. He's talking about people are learning about the rings of Saturn. Okay. And so they're learning about the rings of Saturn, but is it a bland, boring, the rings of Saturn are made of dust and water and ice and whatever, or is it scientist X and scientist Y were battling and they would publish things about each other and say, no, he doesn't get it. And this is the, and they're going back and forth and they're debating what are the rings of Saturn made of? What are the rings of Saturn made of? And they craft a story around it. And then bam, you learn what the rings of Saturn are made of. By the way, I don't know what the rings of Saturn are, but in that, at the end, that is the moment of learning, not the regurgitation of information, but the story that arrived there. And so, and storytelling has its own variation in patterns. It's something that is really a powerful tool in the toolbox, is the ability to tell a story. Because there are three things that your brain will not ignore. One is danger. Two is a question. So, for example, if I said to you, don't answer this, but what's my gender? Okay, so your brain answered it, right? But because your brain must answer a question. If I said, don't answer this, but what color is my shirt? Your brain answered it. So questions are incredibly powerful. A third thing that we can't ignore are stories, especially when they're done well. And so,
what was the first one?
Danger. We
Sure.
can't ignore danger. We can't ignore questions. And we tend to put ourselves in stories when we hear them, especially when they're told well. So to learn the patterns of the people that are successful is, I would submit that if you're out on the football field and you're Jalen Hurts on the greatest football team known to humankind, the Philadelphia Eagles, if you're Jalen Hurts and Micah Parsons is bearing down on you, or you choose the run pass option, are you handing off to Saquon Barkley or are you running? In that split second, that is pattern recognition. He's recognizing a pattern. Which way is Micah going? And he's not sitting there saying, well, his foot is angled to this side and his shoulders are going this way. And no, it's pattern recognition. It's because you're experiencing patterns every time you're reviewing film, every time you're out on the field, every time you're having these conversations. Those patterns, get really good at recognizing them. And then when somebody breaks a pattern, you know something's up. Don't throw to that side. See? Pattern recognition is vital. What's that?
I got to interrupt you for a second.
Sure.
Okay. Eagles make a change at head coach, and they hire you to be the head coach. But really, they don't want you for your football acumen or your football IQ. They want you because they want to develop their players better. They want them to learn more. How would you devise a practice or a program so that you could create consistent and predictable pattern interrupts? I mean, maybe not predictable, intentional ones, so that your players could get off autopilot and actually learn every day they come to work. So it would manifest and reveal itself in the games on Sundays.
That is a phenomenon. What's that?
What would you do? How would you, because honestly, when I'm listening to you, I'm going, all this stuff makes sense to me. I understand 95% of it. And the way you put it together, it totally makes sense. But it's like, just the awareness of it is great, but the application of it is better. And if you can apply it to whatever venue you're in, or genre, career, whatever it might be, that's when the results are going to show up. And so in sports, the biggest missed opportunity in the NFL right now, players don't develop because coaches don't coach. They really don't. And I tell every one of them, they don't. I've been to practices. I've got clients. I've been around this thing for 30 years. They just kind of like herd the cats, and who's got it's got it. Who doesn't, they send away, and they bring in somebody else, but they don't develop them. And, there's guys like Andy Reid who, thankfully, the Eagles were stupid enough to fire him a while back because I'm a Chiefs fan.
Ouch.
And he's done an amazing job in Kansas City. But I think he has developed pattern interrupt teaching in the Chiefs organization. And the pattern interrupt has been trick plays, ingenuity, allowing tight ends to play quarterbacks and different people to do different things that keep it fresh and exciting for the players. And 18 weeks is a long time. You get beat up, you get sore. It's like you lose a few games, you're supposed to win them, and all of a sudden the football's not that much fun. He's got to be interrupting patterns all the time.
Yeah.
So
I remember he opened up a game with an onside kick.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's
a pattern interrupt right there.
Beautiful. Yeah.
So you've had enough time to think about it. And Howie Roseman, who's probably going to be the guy that's going to be calling you, what would you do as a coach to what would you install? What would you implement to accomplish what we just talked about?
Yeah. Well, first, you have to see what the patterns already are. It's really important to have an assessment of what the patterns are. So, for example, it's common in organizations to have there are people who are designated as the leaders. They might be the coaching staff or the nurse manager or the whoever, or they might be the team captain, or whichever it is. But then there are the social leaders. They're the ones who actually are moving the culture, or who are actually the ones that people are subtly looking to. So the first thing to do is to assess what are the existing patterns, and then which ones are helpful, fruitful, worth keeping, and which ones do you need to disrupt? So that's if we're looking just from the domain of patterns. That would be the first thing. To first assess them and then see which ones are not helpful. Now, as far as something I would do, I would say first, don't assume that everything, if you know what the problem is, don't assume that the solution is a direct one. Sometimes the best solutions are indirect. I mean, I'm going to keep going back to healthcare examples, but I was consulted by a health system. They said, we have awful patient experience scores. Can you help us? And so I was like, well, what are they ranking poorly, first of all? And they said, well, it's always the food is always first. And so they're like, but we change the vendors. We've changed this every 3 years. We change vendors and we can't find the right one. And don't assume the problem's the food. The problem is, have you ever seen how food is served in a hospital? It's on some vomit gray tray with some industrial plastic that as you pick it up, the condensation is dripping off. Have you ever opened an Apple product and your pinkies come out and you're like, you keep the box? Why are we packaging hospital food that way? Maybe you put it on a black tray with gold or silverware, the plastic ones that look elegant, and have some sort of peel away thing and call it something different. If you change the experience of the thing, you change how people receive it and how they do it. So I would have to look, what is the culture around film study? Maybe we need to change something there. Maybe we need to, and by the way, you can also gamify it. You can also do something honestly, a lot of the players these days play, Madden, right? So, and they're really worried about their score on their Madden. I might call up EA Sports or whoever creates it now. I might call them up and I might say, hey, I need a custom version that based on their film study and their performance and practices, their numbers change in the game, the video game. You can, and I'm not saying that's the answer to fixing the current 2-2 Philadelphia Eagles issues. I am saying that you need to look at things differently. We've been doing it a certain way all the way through. It's like when Moneyball started, right? The whole thing with the A's, right? The way that happened. Look at it differently. What are the patterns, and what do we need to break? What are the patterns off the field, and can we use those on the field? What are the analogies? What are the things we say? What are the things we say to ourselves? can we use them on the field? If you change the experience of film study, you change how they do, you change whether or not they do film study at all. And so, I mean, that's what I would say. I would also say, like, typically we're studying our own, if you're doing film study, you're probably mostly studying your own position. And those you're going, if you're a linebacker and you're studying the, patterns of the offensive line for your blitz, like, you're studying yourself and the offensive line. Did you look at the receivers? Did you look at the tight end? Did you look to see, I'm saying, look where people aren't looking. This is really common in a lot of different things. The people who change the world are often just looking slightly off. The first millionaire in California made his millions during the gold rush. His name was Samuel Brannan. He made his millions during the gold rush. And to everyone on earth, they would say, oh, well, of course he made it during the gold rush. He found gold. No, he sold shovels, right? So everyone's looking. This is where the problem is. No, it isn't. You need to look in the periphery, because what everyone thinks is the problem is usually not it. And so this is what it's all about with patterns. If you can recognize what are the existing patterns and what are the assumptions. Everyone has this assumption that, if you, whatever the thing is, look in the periphery, look where people aren't looking. You're more likely to find gold.
I think that's great. I think one of the things that I would add to what you just said was in your definition of framing and frames, organizations that aren't reaching their potential. It's not like the Eagles need to, hurry up so they can get to another draft, so they can get talent. They got Saquon, they got Jalen, they've got two unbelievable wide receivers, got a great tight end. It's the framing. It's the frames. Coaches learn from previous coaches. Coaches are copycat artists. They'll do the same thing. Very few coaches, step out of the box. And so any organization that isn't performing at the level that they're capable of, if they would reframe or, take that different perspective that we talked about, they might figure it out.
Yeah. And sometimes frames can be framed in such a way that they are threads. They're sticky. They stay. So, for example, there's a book called Made to Stick by Chip Heath and Dan Heath. Highly recommend the book. In the book, they talk about how if you've ever read a book and then you see the movie and they're very different, it's because the book has to change hands so many times. The book has to go to a screenwriter. The screenwriter rewrites it for the screen. Then somebody composes the musical score. Somebody hires the actors and actresses, and somebody chooses the set. All this stuff, right? It changes hands so many times, and then the movie's different. Well, when they pitched the movie Aliens, they pitched it as Jaws on a spaceship. Now, when you say Jaws on a spaceship, that means the same thing to the screenwriter as it does to the one making the music, as it does to the one hiring the actors and actresses, as it does to the one making the graphics and the background and all this. It's immediately apparent. It lives by itself. So if you can create a frame that is that sticky and becomes a thread, that it becomes the language, that's what people say to each other. It's the year the Eagles won the Super Bowl with the greatest play in the history of football, the Philly Special. The year they won that, they had the underdog masks.
Backup quarterback as the starter.
Exactly. Backup quarterback, third string running back, or third string tight end, and undrafted running back, by the way, on fourth and goal. All right. So I'll get off that soapbox. But if you think about that, that year, they had the dog masks. They had the underdog. They had all that stuff going, right? That was a thread. That was a sticky frame. And that permeated absolutely everybody on that team, into the fan base, into the ads, and into everything surrounding the game. So can you find that for your team at work or on the field or at home? If you can find that, that is powerful.
That is also the identity of the team for that particular season. And sometimes organizations, coaches, and players, all of them, they struggle to figure out what their identity is. They're just supposed to win. They're just supposed to be good. We got all the pieces, we got everybody coming back, and then we added some really good players, and we lost a few that we don't care about. There's always honestly, about 10 teams a season that fit that description. They got the talent.
Yeah.
And everybody kind of expects them to win, but they have no identity. They don't know what they stand for. The fans don't know how to connect with the organization or with the players. And so that year they did. Kansas City this year has an identity. They're wanting to become the first team to three-peat. That's really what it's all about. It's like guys are going to play when they're hurt because they want to three-peat. Guys are going to sign with them that, if they're available on the streets later in the season, they got a choice between Team A and Kansas City. If Kansas City's still doing well, they're probably going to pick Kansas City because they think they're going to go three-peat.
Yeah. Yeah.
They want to
And
jump
Andy
on.
Reid knows how to manage a clock.
Yes. Yeah. Well, you know what?
Which he learned in Kansas City, I guess. I love Andy Reid, by the way.
All I can tell you is he's been amazing for that organization.
Yeah.
But think about this. He had a pattern interrupt in his career. Not just his geography has been reframed, but just like he's not even, people don't even think about him or talk about him the way they used to 10, 20 years ago. He was that coach that just wasn't good enough. Couldn't win the big one. And now every week he's breaking records. It's like the dude's going to be Belichick in a couple of years if he continues to coach.
Yeah. And he has a vast tree of people that have studied under him. That's another thing. He's a successful leader of his team, and he's a leader that created leaders that went on to coach other places. Phenomenal. And also, he went through some tragic things in his life, and so it makes you want to root for him.
Absolutely. Well, Ed, I just looked at the clock, man. We just struck an hour. I can't believe it. Went pretty fast. Didn't even get the chance to cover half the stuff I wanted to cover, but I want to thank you for being on Pro Mindset today. We have to have you on again sometime. If I get out to Baltimore, I'm going to look you up if you're not flying around the country speaking somewhere. I personally know a couple of the Eagles so I kind of pull for those guys. College teammates of my son at Nebraska, they're really good people. But when they play Kansas City, hey, good luck. So, hey, I also want to say, is there anybody that's listening that says, hey, I want to reach out to Ed. I want to invite him to be on stage for our organization. Where can people find you?
Yeah. So, drtori.com. So it's drtori.com. That has all the different things that I do. And then also ways to get in touch with me. And, there's a link there. I think book a discovery call. Happy to just, spend some time, figure out what your needs are. So I do a lot of public speaking, and I also do some consulting and coaching. And by consulting, I don't, sometimes it's just like, hey, I have this one sticky problem. Do you have any ideas? And so then we talk about it. So I love it. Anywhere, if there's a sticky problem that involves influence or communication, I'd love to help, as long as you're doing good in the world. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank everybody for joining Pro Mindset. I want to wrap it up. Check out on Amazon or craigdomann.com. My new book, Pro Mindset, came out last month. And everybody go out and have a great day. Hey, it's Craig Domann, the host of Pro Mindset Podcast. I want to thank you for listening or watching today's show. And you can catch us every week on the normal social media platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and all the listening podcast platforms. I hope you enjoyed today's show. And more importantly, I hope you gained a Pro Mindset insight. Please be sure to rate and review Pro Mindset Podcast. And I look forward to catching up with you on our next show.